All of Braves country is celebrating a world championship. I know, I've seen Twitter, but the baseball calendar is turning towards 2022. Welcome into Battery Power, Cory McCartney, along with Grant McAuley. And Grant, now comes the defense of that Braves title on a team that has defined to-do list, and it starts with a very clear number one priority.
Yeah, you might say number one priority is number 5. That'd be, of course, Freddie Freeman and getting him back and seeing what that contract is going to look like. Of course, these two sides are no strangers. They've been talking for a while, and the last decade that Freddie has spent in an Atlanta uniform has already vaulted him into the ranks of the all-time great Braves. And now the question is, how do you write the rest of his career? Because he's made no bones about wanting to be a Brave for life. But that, of course, will involve signing free agent Freddie Freeman to a contract for Alex Anthopoulos. So, Cory, I know we're going to talk a lot about this and get into what we think the details could be, the average annual value, the overall value, the number of years, all those things. Those are the questions, and that's the gap these two sides have to bridge in the not-too-distant future to get Freddie Freeman locked down for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously not a matter of if Freddie Freeman wants to be a Brave and if the Braves want Freddie Freeman to remain a Brave. I mean, both sides have been very clear about this for a long time. Freeman said it for years, and Alex Anthopoulos, the general manager, mentioned it during his end of the season availability. So, of course, it does become a matter of what gets this done. There's been a report that he turned down a 5-year, $135 million deal, was looking for something closer to 6 at 200. I know you wrote an article about this over here at Talking Chop in the last week. So what in your mind is the kind of deal that could get this done to keep Freeman in Atlanta?
I know we've been talking all along for probably the last year or more about Paul Goldschmidt's extension with the St. Louis Cardinals when he was traded from Arizona to St. Louis prior to the 2019 season. But it is important to remember that was, in fact, an extension. Goldschmidt never got to the free agent market. The two sides were able to come together on that deal. Now, these are not dissimilar players. In fact, they're incredibly similar in terms of the overall careers, the productivity, and the wins above replacement for those two players. It's kind of scary how similar those two guys are, but that doesn't mean that Freeman's free agency is going to play like an extension played for Paul Goldschmidt a couple of years ago. Obviously, a lot's happened in the world, a lot's happened in baseball economics, a lot's going on in baseball economics right now, but I always felt like that Goldschmidt contract was kind of that ground floor. That was going to get you in the lobby, but you're going to have to hit that elevator button and ride it up a few floors to get to Freddie Freeman at this point, because I think he wants more than 5 years. And I think he definitely wants more than the $26 million per year. So to me, I think this is a question of the number of years, the guaranteed money that you can get, and how creative Alex Anthopoulos and company can get in terms of giving Freddie Freeman more of what he wants, while also being able to have the club in a position that they're not taking on an albatross of a contract to a 30-something-year-old first baseman, which we have seen play out in other cases. Albert Pujols, Miguel Cabrera, those are the two most notable ones. But I think this deal is going to get done, and I think it could look something in the neighborhood of what Christian Yelich got from the Milwaukee Brewers a couple of years ago, or last year, actually, just before the season got started in 2020. Yelich's deal at 7 years and $188.5 million, that's $27 million per year. Maybe you look at an 8th year that has a hefty buyout that would give Freddie more guaranteed money and perhaps keep him in a Braves uniform through his age 39 season. But as we've talked about time and time again, we're not really thinking about age 39, Freddie. It's in the equation, but really you're thinking about 2022, 23, 24, 25, and the competitive window that the Braves are operating in right now with some of the best young talent in the game and keeping your star first baseman around. That, to me, is the kind of deal I think they're looking at. Somewhere in that 7 years, maybe $188, $190 million range, if you want to get this deal done with Freeman. I think that could get this deal done. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I thought you could look at maybe 6 at 168 to get it done. I mean, you had a average annual value, a market value for Spot Track of around 27 million, but I think, that's kind of underscoring what Freeman wants at this point. You had mentioned creativity, and I look at the deal that Mookie Betts ended up signing, that 12-year extension that he got with the Dodgers, that included a $65 million signing bonus. I do wonder if you talk about creativity, if there's a way to kind of spread that out throughout the life of a contract to be able to not take that yearly hit on the payroll. And, we know that the Braves have talked about, Anthopoulos in particular, a willingness to increase payroll going into this season. So that doesn't necessarily have to be tied into going out into the market. I mean, obviously that could be used to be able to get Freddie more of the money that he wants in the terms of a signing bonus. I just think there's got to be some creativity, because clearly there's a gap right now that I think many of us thought was going to be bridged months and months ago, probably before the 21 season even started. But here we are, it's getting that much closer to Thanksgiving and a deal is not done. Yeah, I think you're going to have to get creative to find a way to get this done.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I was looking at in creativity was figuring out ways to maybe guarantee more money over the course of the first 5 or 6 years of that deal, while creating team and club options that would allow this to go on longer and longer and kind of stick around the same annual value. But you're right, the creativity there with a signing bonus could be one of the answers for the Braves and for Liberty Media, who, of course, is the one signing the checks ultimately here. But we have heard from Alex Anthopoulos with the surging attendance and revenues that the Braves brought in their 2021 World Championship season. Obviously, people excited to get back in the ballpark in general, and this club taking it all the way. That is going to be the indicator that there's going to be a higher payroll that's going to go up in 2022 and, of course, beyond. When the Braves ended this season at $145 million in total payroll obligations, that's the highest payroll this club has ever had. So if you're looking at that as an indicator of, are they really going to put more money into it? Well, they kind of already have. We talked about that trade deadline a lot. It didn't cost them a ton in prospects. It didn't cost them a ton in overall contract value, but they did have to overcome having Marcell Ozuna, essentially his money being a dead weight, and they're going to have to figure that out going forward. So I don't want to dwell too much in that because I don't think that's going to stop Freddie Freeman's contract from getting signed or this deal getting worked out. But there are a lot of different things in the mix. And economically speaking, I think the Braves are in the best position they could possibly be to go out and re-sign a star the caliber of Freddie Freeman and keep him in a Braves uniform and have his legacy be written in Atlanta and nowhere else.
Well, obviously, no one wants to even consider it, but you at least have to throw out there the possibility that if Freddie Freeman were to go elsewhere, I mean, how do you fill this massive hole that you're going to have at first base? I mean, certainly you could go the free agent route. It's not an especially deep group of first basemen. Anthony Rizzo could be an option there. He's a little bit Freddie Freeman light. You look at the power numbers the last 5 years are somewhat similar. Rizzo's driven in a few more runs. Not that anybody's getting all that excited about RBI that much anymore, but certainly you could go the trade route. The A's, I think, could be sellers, and Matt Olson would be a very lucrative guy to look into if that ends up breaking your way. But obviously, it's the conversation no one wants to have. There is the possibility it could be someone else.
No, there's certainly that possibility, but I'll say this. If you're the Braves and you're sizing up your options, you should only be focused on option A. You don't even want to get down the rest of the sheet to whether it's Anthony Rizzo or Brandon Belt or trying to make a trade for somebody like Matt Olson. These are all quality players, but none of them are Freddie Freeman. I know you look at a 5-year sample of Anthony Rizzo, and there are some similarities, but the last couple of 3 years, it's been Freddie Freeman kind of up here and Anthony Rizzo somewhere in here, a productive player, but a guy that is simply not Freddie Freeman. But hey, who is? There's not another one out there on the free agent market. I don't know too many clubs that are going to be peddling one of those on the trade market either. And so you really end up in a position where both sides have a desire to get this deal done, but you're going to have to figure out the money and the years. And I think if you're Alex Anthopoulos, you want to solve for A and not even worry about what else is going on down that list, because you could let Freddie Freeman walk, or if you end up not signing him thinking, hey, we're going to make a trade, and that guy could get traded somewhere else, because there are 28, 29 other clubs, depending on how you break down that trade partner, that are going to be looking to make deals as well. So there's no exclusivity when it comes to that. There may not be any more exclusivity when it comes to the negotiating rights for Freddie Freeman, but I still feel like that's the main focus until it's not. Until he's no longer an option, I wouldn't spend a lot of time worrying about first base. I think that's the deal that is the one that makes the most sense for both sides. I still think it's a deal that's going to get done. I think it's a deal that needs to get done. I could go on and on and on and on about that. But if I'm Alex Anthopoulos, that is my target. And unless or until that changes, then I'm not going to spend a bunch of time making other plans.
The one thing I will say, though, is the fact that they let this even get to the free agent market is obviously driving up the price of this whole thing.
Sure.
I mean, how could you have gotten this done, quicker if there's an exclusivity and you have him, in your clubhouse, and you could have easily gotten this done in the spring. You could have got it done. I know no one wants to talk during the season. Obviously, no one wants to talk during a postseason run, but just so many opportunities to have even avoided this situation if you're the Braves. But certainly, as you mentioned, number one priority is number 5. As we move on to the outfield, Ronald Acuna Jr. is on the mend, and the Braves have some inherent needs out there. We obviously don't know what the future holds for Marcell Ozuna. Adam Duvall declined his mutual option, but he remains under club control. The only other outfielders on the 40-man roster are Guillermo Heredia, Travis Demeritte, and Christian Pache, Eddie Rosario, Jock Peterson, Jorge Soler, all free agents. Grant, how are you filling those outfield spots if you're Alex Anthopoulos?
I'd be looking at reunions, particularly with Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario. These are two guys that came over kind of unheralded players from where they were. I mean, not a lot of expectation, I think, could be put on a guy hitting below 200 and another guy who was sitting on the injured list. But I know you got Adam Duvall already under a contractual obligation if you tender him a contract. I think the Braves are going to do that this time around, but we'll find out because the economics will play a little bit of a role in that as well. But I like Soler, but if you can't get him back, obviously I like Rosario too. I think they're two guys that fit. I think they're two guys that clearly carved out a very good spot in Braves lore with what they did in the postseason. But I think there's tread on the tire for both of them to be productive big league players and to have a place in the outfield. And I think you've got to start making some kind of plan for DH, don't you? I mean, you've got Marcell Ozuna, of course, under contract, but that is something that we can save for another time. It's very complicated, and you don't know when and if he'll ever put on a Braves uniform again. I would start making plans without him. I think people have probably been doing that mentally for a while, but now you have to physically start making that plan. And I don't think Ozuna is going to be a big factor in that. But a guy who will be a factor in the Atlanta outfield is Ronald Acuna Jr. when he comes back. Is that opening day? I don't know about that. Is it May 1st? Is it sometime after that? You still have to have the outfield fully lined up and ready to roll on opening day, regardless of whether or not you can pencil in number 13 at the top of the lineup and in right field. But if you look at center field, that's the real area that makes this a more interesting, I guess, shopping season for Alex Anthopoulos, because Adam Duvall showed he could play center field, but you're not going to do that over 162 games. You have a Gold Glove caliber prospect in Christian Pache, who has shown at times why exactly the club has been so high on him. I think it's much like Austin Riley. You've got to let this kid go out there and play and show you either A, he can hold down a big league job, B, he cannot, or perhaps C, which is probably somewhere in between, he could be a serviceable fourth outfielder defensive replacement and start to get his feet under him over time. Either way, I think Pache is a factor here, but if I'm looking at guys to bring in, I'm not really expanding that search to every single free agent outfielder out there. Jorge Soler or Eddie Rosario would be great to bring back if you also bring back Adam Duvall. I think that's kind of the fit that you're looking at in the Atlanta outfield.
Now with Soler, I wonder, I mean, this is a guy that, made $8 million last year in 2021 at age 29. I would anticipate he's looking for a multi-year deal. Does that end up pushing him into that 12 million per range? And with Rosario, I mean, projected at 2 years and 7.5 million. Obviously, this is a guy that, had 133 weighted run created plus in an Atlanta uniform. I think he could be obviously worthwhile and pretty cost effective when you think about what that could do, obviously with the return on that. But the DH makes it just so much more, you mentioned it, so much more alluring to have Soler in particular. Yeah. But I think, neither one of us had mentioned it at this point. Jock Peterson just feels like he's moving on. I think he's a guy who, wants to be an everyday player. I just don't think there's an opportunity for him to do that in Atlanta. With Pache, it's interesting because obviously he just won a Gold Glove in the minors. And I think, as you mentioned, along with Riley, you got to try to figure out at some point what you have in this guy. Yeah. But what if you do want to upgrade? I mean, Starling Marte, as a free agent, this guy led the majors in stolen bases last year. He's 33 years old. I think age could be a concern. As we watched, Braves fans watch Michael Bourne, that speed is one of the first things that go, especially with a center fielder. Is obviously you could look at the trade market. Could you lure, Byron Buxton away from the Twins? I mean, obviously, he's a guy who's not been able to be on the field consistently, although when he has, he's been spectacular. So that could, who knows what that would end up costing you. I just think there's a lot of different ways it could go. Brian Reynolds, we know that's someone everyone would love to have in a Braves uniform, including the Braves, but they could just not get that done last year with the Pirates. So there's just so many options in this outfield, but obviously you have a comfort level with Soler and Rosario. You've got to figure things out with Pache, but it's like when you start mixing and matching it, every option you have is like, okay, what do you do in center field? What do you do in a center field? And I think that's where things, more than anything, you got to get this sorted out because almost every optimum version of what you're putting out there offensively right now does not include Pache.
Right. I think that perhaps it doesn't at the moment, but it's important on this show for us to not get tunnel vision on only Soler and Rosario as being the only solutions for the Atlanta outfield. Yeah. B, which may be even more important, is Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to be a factor in the Braves outfield, hopefully sooner than later, but I don't think he's going to be a factor in center field anymore. So you kind of lose some flexibility there. I just can't imagine bringing him off an injury to his ACL and then asking him to go out there and be an everyday center fielder after already deciding that perhaps the best move for him defensively is to put him over in right field, where I think he can be a premium and a standout defender, and I think he already is, but he is coming off injury, so that kind of changes the whole dynamic there. So you end up with What do you have in Christian Pache? Can you afford to find out on a club that just won the World Series and is defending that title and has eyes on winning it again and perhaps again after that, as most teams that win a World Series or a World Championship do? But there are a lot of options out there. You just laid out quite a few on the trade market. And I'll come back to Alex Anthopoulos on this. He has not made that big signature trade, I feel like, that winter trade that makes his club demonstratively better, that he cashes in on some of that prospect capital, and that he brings over a premium level player to add to what is now the defending world champions. This would be a great winter for him to do that. I know it's not all about him putting his stamp on it and saying, hey, I've arrived, I've made the big move. He's made many big moves that have helped the Braves win over the past few years, but he hasn't made that one big trade in the winter. I'd be interested to see if that happens. And as we've discussed many times, and as I'm sure fans have noted, Alex Anthopoulos gets a lot of work done, usually before and or around Thanksgiving. Before you even get to the winter meetings, it seems like he's already made that move. So we'll see if that's the case again this year.
Max Fried, Charlie Morton, Ian Anderson. We know the Braves are set in terms of those three guys in the rotation. Then obviously you'd love to get Mike Soroka back, but when's that going to happen? How viable is he going to be when he does get back? And then you start looking at those younger guys. I mean, those names we know all too well: Kyle Wright, Kyle Muller, Touki Toussaint, Huascar Yanoa. Who else is going to be able to hold down a rotation spot? And does it leave the Braves into the position where they've been many times over the last few years, where they have to go out and get a veteran supplement to this group? Grant, where are you on this? Do they have enough pitching right now where they don't have to go to that route, or do they need to bring in somebody else to help supplement what's already in place?
I think that bringing in one more veteran supplement would not hurt, but I think it's not something that you want to throw all of your funds into and get wrapped up in the $15 to $20 million range. I think they've already done that nicely with having Charlie Morton, not only in 2021, but making the proactive move of extending him and bringing him back for 2022. He's going to be healed up and ready. The question mark still surrounds Mike Soroka. Will he be healed up? A, and then B, because I keep going to these A, B, and C scenarios. When can you count on him? How much can you count on him? What kind of workload can you put on him? I hate to keep asking those questions, but you just have to at this point, because he hasn't thrown a pitch off a major league mound in a regular season game since August of 2020 at this point. And you're talking about the 2022 season. It has unfortunately been a bumpy ride for Mike Soroka, but there's nobody that I like more. There's nobody that I think could make a bigger difference, or I would want to see make a bigger difference in the Braves rotation than Soroka. But it almost seems like if a lot of other things go well, then Mike Soroka would be a bonus as you make your plans at this point. By the time you got to the end of the World Series, I know a lot of folks have always talked about the Braves being deep in starting pitching. You simply weren't there anymore. I forget who tweeted it to me, but, there was that Spawn and Sane and Pray for Rain thing for a while. By the time the Braves got to the end of the World Series, and again, this is not my material, but it was just so good, Anderson and Fried is all we need, might be what you're printing on the shirt at that point. But you can't go through 162 games like that. They're going to have to add to it. I think Tucker Davidson, Kyle Wright, guys like that are still looked at, Kyle Muller, as potential fifth starters. Whether or not Touki Toussaint is in that discussion anymore, I don't know. I've always liked his stuff, and I think he could be a dynamic reliever perhaps out of the bullpen. You like to grow those on the farm as well. There are still young arms, but I just don't think the Braves can afford to say, okay, we're going to let that get sorted out on the farm, as they have not really done that the past couple of years. I just don't see that changing right now. And you're going to need to have more and more and more of these layers of depth. I think they should put some money into the free agent market or a trade that brings them a known commodity to slot in somewhere, whether it's 3 or 4 in the rotation, but right there that you can depend on to give you the innings you need.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these options. I mean, certainly the free agent pitching market is substantial. I mean, you can look at almost different degrees of how deep you want this to hurt, right? I mean, you look at a solid guy along the lines of Marcus Stroman. You could take a gamble with Justin Verlander, who I would, definitely be on board with them, trying to get a guy that's got is on his way to the Hall of Fame, and it has a lot to prove, having just pitched one game since 2020. Obviously, he's a risk coming off of Tommy John surgery. But Carlos Rodon is another guy with a long injury history, who could be another risk, but also could pay off substantially for you. Guys like Corey Kluber, if you think about what the Braves have done in the past with the likes of Drew Smiley and Anibal Sanchez, and getting that guy, who's maybe a little bit further down than you would have expected a name like that to be, but things have obviously, changed in terms of what he's able to do for you on a consistent basis. There's a lot of different options out there, but I do think it's worth pointing out, Eduardo Rodriguez in this 7-year, $55 million deal with the Tigers Does that give us an indication? I mean, this is a guy that was a 4.5 ERA the last season, pencils in as a 3 or 4 in a rotation, and he's getting that kind of money to open up things here in this free agent market. So pitching could be very expensive, and I just think it's a matter of how much do the Braves want this to hurt in order to get a guy that can supplement someone's young talent.
Yeah, I mean, the market will, of course, start to become a little bit more clear with the more signings. 5 years, 77, 5 years and 80, whatever it is for Rodriguez. A team like the Tigers had to really come out of the pocket to pay for a pitcher like that to fill a very definite need for them. The Braves are in a little bit better position in that I think they could shop around more so than the Tigers, who clearly have to go out and sign a free agent or two to start getting their rotation really put together, including the front end of the rotation, the middle of the rotation, which is why I think it's fascinating. And this is not a Detroit Tigers video podcast at all, but maybe Justin Verlander ends up back in Detroit. That could make a ton of sense, especially since they can afford to spend on that. I just don't know that the Braves want to get themselves caught in the trap, if you will, of maybe having that veteran pitcher that has a big name and postseason success, or maybe on the way to Cooperstown in the case of Verlander, and end up in the Cole Hamels camp again. I don't think that they want to go that route as plan A. And so maybe you start looking at other trades, other free agents, guys that are just a little bit more healthy and a little bit more dependable at this point in their career. In the case of a guy like Verlander, who you could pay big money, it could pay off big time. You could pay big money, he could suffer a setback or simply not be the same pitcher he was before having surgery in the twilight of his career. So that's why I don't get too caught up in a name like that. I love Marcus Stroman. I do think he's going to get a few substantial offers in other places. Maybe there are just some names that you can find in a very big, a very robust market for starting pitching that haven't gotten the offer that they want and haven't signed by the time you start approaching spring training. Maybe that deal starts to make a little bit more sense then than being the Alex Anthopoulos strike early, strike often approach that he's done so many times in the past. They're in a good place, I think, though, with Morton, with Fried, and with Ian Anderson right there as their top three, to go ahead and add that fourth and then look at the younger arms they have to try to figure out who the fifth spot in rotation could be.
Yeah, maybe I'm being naive about this, but I think about Stroman and potentially if he wants a 3-year deal, are you ultimately stopping those younger guys from being able to come up and hold down those spots? Like, how much is bringing in a guy along those lines kind of hampering you when you've already got so much young talent from allowing those guys? I mean, I think about Kyle Wright, and obviously we saw him, have an extremely strong World Series, but he's also been someone who's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle at times and not gotten that real opportunity to go out and prove that he can do it consistently in a major league level. How much does having somebody like that come in and I'm not saying Stroman, anybody along those lines kind of inhibit those guys from ever really being able to kind of see if they can hold down a spot in a rotation like this?
It could, but I mean, the ultimate thing that the Braves are trying to do and every club's trying to do if they're in a competitive window like this is win the World Series, which is what they just did and what they want to do again. And Kyle Wright certainly made his contribution to that, which is why I think as you come back into spring training, you're looking at Kyle Wright, Huascar Ynoa, Kyle Muller, Tucker Davidson, guys like that in the fifth spot of your rotation. Some of them are going to go have to pitch in AAA again. That's just the way it works. There are 5 spots. But as we've seen, whether it was Mike Soroka a couple of years ago and then all of the fallout and the Braves trying to field a rotation in the aftermath of that. And then in 2021, by the time you got to the end of the season, there just weren't the big league options that you wanted in rotation yet again. I think you go into the winter trying to make a better plan than having to patchwork it through again and again and again, which is just, it worked. Hey, you won the World Series and your bullpen was a huge reason why. And 2 months before the end of the season, you weren't even thinking about the Braves bullpen being perhaps the MVP of the postseason, but here we are, and the Braves are probably just now having the champagne all cleaned up and, ready to go about maybe focusing on next year. I don't know, maybe we'll celebrate a little while longer, but I think you got to go out and continue to bring in talent, and hopefully that pushes the other talent to raise their game up a bit. Maybe they find another role on the pitching staff. Maybe you make a couple of more trades that strengthen you somewhere else with some of those young players. They're not all going to come up and be big stars and, become a Max Fried or become a Mike Soroka when healthy. But in some cases, they could help you out in the bullpen. In other cases, they could help you acquire the players that you need to in order to continue to win divisions and series and postseason series and ultimately World Series. So you have a lot of different ways to go. Even if you'd love them to get an everyday opportunity, it's just not realistic to think 3, 4, 5 of those guys are going to be getting turns in rotation, especially when 3, if not 4 of the spots in rotation are already spoken for.
Well, nobody gets their holiday shopping, as you mentioned, done quicker than Alex Anthopoulos does. Think about these November deals that he's done. Brian McCann, Josh Donaldson, Travis d'Arnaud, Charlie Morton, Drew Smiley. We'll see if he has any more up his sleeves before we get into Thanksgiving and Christmas. And obviously the CBA expiration looming on December 1st. You wonder how much that, if there's a lockout and players are unable to sign, who's going to be willing to jump the gun here and get some more deals done before that even expires on December 1st. So certainly something to watch. And obviously we will be here with you every step of the way on Battery Power. So make sure that you subscribe to the Talking Chop YouTube channel, turn on those notifications so you get an alert every time that we drop a new episode. He's Grant McAuley. I'm Cory McCartney. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in next time, Braves Country.